this whole area is, if it was being labeled accurately, is an environment. I mean, it should be a Superfund site. I don't know if it is, but now they want to add this extra thing. And the thing that really bothers me, I mean, I'm not, asking any of you to, go crazy here, but well, Chicago's a Democratic city, and we're told over and over again, vote blue no matter who. I'm not saying Republicans will do any better here, but Lori Lightfoot, I mean, obviously a woman, African-American, she was pushed on a lot of identity issues, but is she really acting much differently than Mayor Rahm Emanuel, who covered up the murder of Laquan McDonald to get reelected, now has a fat, contributor's job on ABC. He spent God knows how many, I mean, tens of millions, maybe more. I mean, the Riverwalk is very beautiful, but to me, they beautified about 15, 20 bucks and left the rest of the city to rot, which is kind of the story of America. I don't know if any of you have additional comment on Lightfoot specifically, because it kind of projects to the wider Democratic Party that is allowing these things to happen, looking the other way on permits, pay for play. What do you think, Chuck?
This is where I bring up the term again, neoliberalism, and that's the Democratic Party we see here. It's been labeled the neoliberal agenda, and it's been in play for quite a long time in the city, and you see it played out where like the typical example of redlining very much happened in Chicago. And then you get these neighborhoods that become predominantly people of color, either Black or Latinx communities. And then all white people are scared out, like, oh, your property value is going to go down. So you better get out now. So then you get these communities that then the city can start to disinvest in. And when these communities are disinvested in, then people don't want to move in there. Then eventually people stop going to the schools because the schools aren't as good. So then you can shut the schools down because nobody's going to the schools. And so then the area becomes blighted. And when an area gets labeled as blighted, now the city releases funds to revitalize these areas. And then developers can come in and start to buy up this extremely cheap land, revitalize it, get tax support from the city, and then say that they are revitalizing these blighted areas and making it better for everybody, but then it ends up gentrifying these neighborhoods. I don't think that's answering your question directly, but that's kind of the history of Chicago. That's because you said Chicago is a Democratic city. That's what the Democrats have done here. That's what the neoliberals have done here. Mayor Lightfoot does not seem to be operating any differently. And she has this similar playbook that gets very exhausting and frustrating, where she, when something happens, like for example, there was a woman who for 2 years has been fighting because her apartment was raided wrongly, and she was handcuffed naked while the police searched her house. And I don't know how long she was handcuffed. It was like an hour or something, 2 hours. And the city didn't do anything. It took 2 years of her fighting till finally she had to leak it to the press to get any attention. And the mayor comes out and she says, "Oh, this is horrible. This is horrible. This is a disgrace. I can't believe this happens. We're going to make this right. I knew nothing of this. We're going to make this right." And then a week later, it turns out that she actually did know about it. And so she comes out and then she does this thing where she's like, "I'm going to do better. I promised you I was going to do better." And then it gets exposed that she actually wasn't. And then she gets really defensive. And she's like, denies everything. And then she gets kind of unhinged. And then she gets mad. And then she's like, blames it on other people. And it's the same storyline. And we're seeing it right now. So regarding this hunger strike and this us denying the permit, right now she just finally released something saying like, we work hard. We listen to all residents, and some residents are loud, but I'm also listening to other people too. and she claims that she wants to listen and respect all voices. But this is her first step. So next, who knows? Maybe she's going to suddenly start getting like defensive and mad and unhinged at us.
And who are those other people she's listening to? That's what I'd like to know.
I would like to know that too.
Probably the people that paid her. But now that we're on the topic, I think it also ties back into even our local representation, right? Because sometimes you have people that are in office that project and try to enforce what they think is best for the community without really listening to the community and what they want and what they need, right? So if you're coming from a background where you're predominantly viewing economic development as just large industry and manufacturing and warehousing, in your head, that's what you're going to think is best. You're going to think that everybody in your neighborhood wants to be working class and just have money in their pockets, right? And not really care about their surroundings. Like, as long as they have a good job, that's what they need. And we've had to struggle even convincing some of our residents in the 10th Ward that like the industry that we've had since the 70s is just like not normal because of the pollution that they've exuded into our climate. And we've had to educate a lot of folks and kind of almost provide an alternative reality for them and help them understand themselves that like there are other ways to be economically stable aside from just relying on, you know, unionized jobs and heavy polluting industry. And just because that's been our norm for, you know, 30 plus years, doesn't mean that if we try an alternative route that we're going to fail, you know, or that it's not going to be economically stable. And it starts with our local leaders. You know, it starts with them being able to take a step back and say, okay, maybe I don't know what's best right now. Let me try and find those different resources in my community so we can work cohesively and create a better environment for everybody, instead of taking it as a defense where it's essentially like, oh, you know, community organizations and environmental organizations are just attacking me, like, and taking it personal. Because at the end of the day, like, us being on a hunger strike isn't personal. Like, I'm not doing this for me. You know, I'm not starving myself for me. I'm starving myself for the people that don't have a voice, for the people that have to work every single day and don't have time to organize, for the students that are struggling just to get their homework done on a weekly basis where they can't even think and function. You know, like, that's who we're doing it for. We're not doing it for ourselves. So I think if politicians can kind of take a hint and just kind of a reference from how we're approaching the situation and be selfless, we would get a lot farther than where we're at right now.
Oh, politicians and selfless. What a term, what a phrasing. Speaking of personal, isn't your sister in school where this area is?
Yes, she is. Yeah,
So,
she's a sophomore at George Washington High School.
okay, so she's at high school, right? Basically in the backyard of where the scrap metal location would be. So
With asthma, yeah.
and she has asthma.
Mm-hmm.
Terrible. And let me ask you, Brianna, you know, in my view of Chicago, there's been a significant exodus of people leaving Chicago over the last decade or so, partially because they've been priced out, and gentrification and these kinds of things. But can you kind of talk about, you know, the wider lens? It seems like Lightfoot, you know, and after Emmanuel is really trying to bring in those upper middle class, let's say suburbanite yuppies to downtown Chicago. And that's a real focus. The phrase is economic development, but that's really what it is. Bring in people making more money that, you know, are not going to have to deal with this, and kind of giving lip service to the rest of the community.
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, I think that another thing to point out for the Lightfoot administration was in the summer when the protests for the defund CPD campaign started to get a little hot around her block. She bought property out in like one of the rich suburbs. I think it was Oak Park or something. And maybe I got the wrong neighborhood. Forgive me. But yeah, there are $1 million condos downtown. I used to work with doctors who would tour them. It is something that is not equally accessible across the city. I mean, that even in the pandemic, we're seeing unemployment rates. A lot of people have the ability to work from home. A lot of people have had sustained like health coverage during this time. A lot of people, if a loved one passed, have, it's an unfortunate circumstance, and they're able to financially cover, the expenses of, taking care of all the documentation and ceremonies that go with losing a loved one. That's not equal across all of our communities. We do see it in selective policymaking as we're seeing now. When we raise this to even some people who aren't necessarily as informed in the community, they say, "Oh, just move." I'm sorry, is that accessible to everyone? It's like people have, why would that be the resolution to this type of issue, is just move? You're getting bought out. Why is that something that these communities have to accept? And that is, I lived in Hyde Park when I first moved here, and we saw that with selective apartment companies. They would buy up these gorgeous old buildings that had beautiful families and like family-owned businesses, and a lot of those people got put out and had to move elsewhere, somewhere cheaper, and those businesses got shut down, and that neighborhood lost a lot of character. And that apartment company, I think that they were trying to evict people, and it took protesting for them to not during COVID. But that is something that's consistent. It's a mindset too. This is accessible to me. I'm going to take it, without any mindset of the history of the culture that has existed there before you, without any respect. We see that on Indigenous land too. I mean, there's been in the news a lot of breaking of treaties and the water pipelines and things like that, oil pipelines. There's just a lack of respect for that level. And at some point that gap starts to get further and further. If you have this set income and you have good credit, you can get a second property, and this person is struggling to even get their first, or they've got student loans and their parents' medical debt and just inherited, generational trauma, which is biologically validated and yet somehow still disputed by so many people, how intergenerational trauma can be passed down to, your offspring. And policies just uphold that. People say, "Oh, just move if you don't like it." And people working, both parents working 40 hours a week, kids struggling to stay in school, that's not realistic. And it takes putting pressure on our local legislators to make change. That's what we're trying to do now. It shouldn't be the burden of us to take this extent to get attention to it and bring it back to the hunger strike. It shouldn't get to this point, truthfully, and I wish it didn't. But we are a strong community. I've only been here for a year and a half, but there are community leaders that have learned a lot from in the year and a half that I've been here, that I will continue to uphold, and no community should settle for this anywhere in the city. Lincoln Park got to kick them out, so should we.
Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com, where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.